Most people think real estate is about money. That assumption keeps them stuck, watching from the sidelines. The truth is, real estate's about structure, how deals are designed, how risk is managed, and how capital is attracted, not chased. This show exists for people who don't want information. They want to learn how to execute. I'm Mike Morawski. I'm a real estate investing coach who teaches investors how to acquire and finance real estate with little or no money down by mastering terms, leverage, and deal structure. Hey, look, markets change, rates move, but structure works in every cycle. Real estate isn't bought with money, it's built with structure. This is the Mic Drop Show.
Hey, it's a new year, everybody. I hope that everyone had an amazing holiday. All right, let's get started here this morning. Let me start here because surprises people all the time. You know, I didn't get into real estate because I loved houses. I didn't get into it because I wanted passive income, and I definitely didn't get into it because someone on the internet told me to. I got into real estate because I wanted control. You know what? Control over my time, over my decisions, and eventually control over the outcomes. Here's the mistakes most people make. They think real estate is just a wealth strategy. You know, it's not. It's a decision-making strategy. And when I started, I didn't understand that. You know, I thought if I worked harder, saved money, followed the rules, things would fall into place, but they didn't. What actually changed my trajectory wasn't motivation. It wasn't money. It was realizing that people winning weren't smarter. They were just thinking differently. And today I want to walk you through the moment, through that moment that changed for me. Because, you know, if you're listening to this show, there's a good chance you're closer to that than you think. There's a good chance you want to start thinking differently in the new year. So let me take it back to where my assumptions were wrong, and why that mattered more than any deal I had ever done. So let me tell you what my thinking looked like in the beginning. I believe that if I did what everyone said I should, that was the responsible thing to do. Save money, play it safe, wait until the numbers felt perfect. You know, actually, my dad used to have this saying: go to work for a company, work 40 hours a week for 40 years, and when you retire, they'll give you a $40 watch. And you know, those days are long gone. It sounds smart. It just doesn't work in real life, because real estate doesn't reward caution the way people think it does. It rewards clarity. And how clear are you? You know, I didn't have clarity yet. I had rules. Here's what no one warned me about. Rules. I wasn't failing because I was solving the wrong problems. You know, I kept asking, how do I afford this? Instead of asking, how do I structure this? You know, it's what we say to ourselves and how we say it at times that gives us that belief, that gives us that thinking. That one question delayed me more than any market condition ever did. I wasn't broke. I was boxed in by the wrong questions. You know, I learned a long time ago that the better questions we ask, the better answers that we get. Now, here's where it's going to get really uncomfortable. When you don't understand structure, every deal feels risky. You know, how do you eliminate that risk? Every conversation feels intimidating. And, you know, everyone, it feels even personal. So what do most people do? They wait, they study, they get more education. They tell themselves that they're just being patient. Once they learn everything, that then they're going to get started. But patience without direction, just the fear of wearing a nicer outfit, really. I remember looking at deals and thinking, hey, I'll come back to this when I'm ready. That day just never came because readiness doesn't arrive first, perspective does. So, what are you doing to change your perspective? Readiness doesn't come before perspective. Perspective creates readiness. And then something happened that forced me to confront this. I watched someone else do a deal I had passed on. Same market, same property, same risks, but they had a different outcome. The outcome was different because they did something differently. Not because they had more money, because they didn't. Not because they had better timing, because I had the same timing. They just understood how to frame that deal differently. And that's where that structure comes in, is how we frame that deal differently. That was the moment I realized I wasn't competing against investors. I was competing against my own assumptions. There's so many times that the biggest competition in the marketplace isn't anyone else except yourself. I wasn't losing to other investors. I was losing to my assumptions. Now, once that clicked for me, I stopped looking for answers everywhere else. And I started breaking down deals differently, not to copy them, but to understand why they worked. How do I look at them? How do I think differently? How do I think creatively? That's a critical distinction in current thinking to future thinking, right? Copying teachers, nothing when conditions change. Understanding, let's just adapt. And that's when things slowed down in a good way. I became more deliberate, more selective, less emotional about things. Deals stopped feeling like pressure. They started feeling like, how can I solve a problem? Now, when you put yourself in a situation and there is a problem, what, do you say, oh, how am I going to, oh my God, what am I going to do? Or do you say, give me some direction in how to handle this? You know what? When deals stop feeling like emotional distress, they start becoming more solvable. Here's the part people don't really hear. Real estate didn't give me freedom right away. It gave me responsibility first. Responsibility for my decisions, responsibility for the risk tolerance, responsibility for other people's money, responsibility for outcomes I could no longer blame on anyone else. That's not glamorous sometimes, but it's honest, right? Wouldn't you rather be honest than glamorous? And honesty is what most investors are missing. They want certainty before commitment. We don't always get certainty, but real estate offers clarity after that commitment. That's not recklessness. That's reality. We're not trying to do something to be reckless. We're trying to live in that space of reality. Hey, once I accepted all this, my whole approach changed. I stopped asking how fast I could grow. I started asking how clean my decisions were and how clean and clear those decisions compounded. When I first went into the multifamily business, I never thought that I'd close a 200 unit multifamily deal. And what's amazing to me that before I knew it, I was closing 300 and 400 unit deals. That could be you. You could do the same thing. This is not part of the journey most people, look past or skip over because it's hard, but because it requires unlearning some of your old ways of doing things. I never thought I could, do a deal with no money down. But you know what? That first real estate deal I ever did, I spent $1,000. Now, that wasn't no money down, but it was almost no money down, right? I mean, come on. And, so unlearning some of our old stories gives us that progress to move forward. So if you're listening to this and thinking, I feel stuck, you're probably not missing information. You're probably holding on to values and rules that no longer apply in your life. And in the next episode, if I'm going to tell you about my first real win and why it's almost taught me the wrong lessons, but because of how I reframed it, it told me better lessons. Because success without the right framework can be more dangerous than failure. So, framework is how we think differently, how we think outside the box and think creatively. As I mentioned, I never thought I'd do a deal with no money down. But last year, I bought a 65 unit apartment complex, basically no money down. And the owner's holding a second mortgage of $1 million with no interest. I mean, who would think that you could structure deals like that? There's so many ways to be able to do that. Here's what I want you to leave with today. Most people don't fail in real estate because they're lazy. They fail because they're obedient. They follow rules that they never questioned. They wait for permission that never comes. They confuse being careful with being prepared. Hey, listen, I did the same thing. I did it for a long time. I did it when I was in the construction business. I did it when I was in the residential business. And I even did it in the beginning when I was in the apartment business. But you know what? I changed that story. And every time I did it, based on rules, I changed the story a little bit. And that's that compounding factor. That's that compounding piece that the more you do it, the more you change it, the more you disbelieve those old beliefs and believe the new beliefs. That's where the growth happens. So for a long time, I thought discipline meant waiting. I thought responsibility meant playing small until things felt safe. Hey, let me ask you a question. Are you married? Have you and your wife maybe talked about having kids, but you're waiting for the right time till you have more money, till you have a better job, till things feel more secure? Are you waiting to get married till you have more money, you feel more secure? You know what? It's the same thing in everything that we do in our lives. You got to quit waiting and start taking action. It's not in the safety. Safety's subjective. And being ready is a moving target, because every time it's like setting goals. Sometimes every time you set a goal, that target moves and you want to move a little bit faster or a little bit further on. What actually changed my path wasn't confidence. It was ownership. Ownership in my decisions, in my choices, ownership in overcoming the blind spots and knowing that even if they showed up, I'd be able to walk through them and work through them. Ownership of the fact that I wanted different results. I had to think differently. That's what this is about. This is what your investing journey is about. It's about getting uncomfortable, but it's also freeing. The more uncomfortable you get, the more you walk through that uncomfortability. Let me give you a quick story about uncomfortability. When I was selling residential real estate, one of the things I did was I made cold calls every day. And a lot of people say that's antiquated and outdated, but you know what? I did it back then and I made 20,000 a day. And I don't care how many days in a row I prospected and made those cold calls. I was uncomfortable every day for those first 4, 5, 6 phone calls. But it's like going to the gym and building a muscle. Every time you do a little bit more, that uncomfortability lessens and it goes away. It keeps you from freezing up. Because you know what? You got to stop blaming markets. You have to stop blaming timing and realize that leverage was always internal. So it's what comes from inside of us, right? It's that leverage inside of us. How do we leverage ourselves? Remember earlier I said the only competition we have is ourselves. So early success can be more dangerous than early failure, right? So take that risk, step out there. That's why we're going to talk about, that's what we're going to talk about next time in the next episode, or then our next show every week, right? We're here every week. The first deal that worked, why it mattered, and why it almost taught me the wrong lessons. You know, I did that first deal, and you know what? I was a little nervous about it. My knees were knocking. I'm not going to be lying to you. But you know what? As I walked through it, I learned a little bit more. Somebody asked me the other day, I was on the phone with a coaching client, and somebody asked me the other day, they said, so when you did your first deal, tell me about it. How did that happen? And I said, well, you know what? I had no coach. I had no mentor. I just took action. I went out, I put an 11 unit apartment deal under contract. I put that first 4 unit owner finance deal under contract. And, then I said, oh my God, how am I going to pay for this? And I had to take the steps to raise capital. I had to take the steps to learn how to operate that first property. You know what? If you're at a stage where you're trying to do everything right, or you feel like you're doing everything right, but you still feel like something's missing, hey, this series is going to be for you. The upcoming weeks, we're going to cover a lot more of this, a lot more in depth, because before tactics, before money, before scaling your business, there's a way of thinking that you have to earn. And I don't think that mindset gets talked enough about in the real estate business, real estate investing, whether it's residential, whether you're doing, little or no money down financing, or you're doing residential fix and flips, or whether you're doing a apartment business, right? Before tactics and money and scale, you got to think differently. And that's what I'm going to help you do over the next few weeks, is think differently. So subscribe to our channel and watch us and show up on Wednesday morning with us. And once you do, real estate stops feeling random. It starts feeling intentional. If this episode made you rethink your approach to deals, and then I did the job this morning. Real estate isn't bought with money. It's built with structure. It's built with reframing that deal, reframing the seller's position, reframing the story in your own mind. Hey, you know what? This has been the Mic Drop Show, and there's a mic drop for you.